Well, hello, thank you for watching, and welcome to this series devoted to applying conservative exegesis to biblical texts relevant to the topic of hell. Since hell is an English word and not Hebrew or Greek, and since it may or may not correspond to a variety of different Hebrew and Greek words, and especially since theology is not done best at a mere word level, this study will focus on answering a broader question. Instead of just asking, which verses have the word hell in them and what do I think they mean, the question should be, what view emerges when one asks the question, what does the whole counsel of Scripture say about what happens to the unrepentant, unredeemed wicked? After all, if you think of it, if one of the main messages of Christianity is that Jesus saves, then we should know what he saves us from. Hello again. Welcome to another Every Verse on Hell. Turns out there's a lot of verses on hell, which is interesting. And I, Sunday morning, hardly ever preach on hell, if I ever have at all, only tangentially, which is interesting because it's not a dominant theme in the Bible, but you can't really escape the concept by focusing on the positive, because even when you focus on the positive, like Jesus saves, then there's sort of this implicit statement of he saved you from something. You say, well, Christ loves you. And you can say, well, I love me too. And you're like, well, okay, but Christ demonstrated his love by dying for you. And you could ask, but why? Because the wages of sin is death. What does that mean? You know, that kind of a thing. So the idea that God will give his very own life for his faithful, giving them everlasting life. And the idea that there will be some unrepentant, unredeemed wicked, it appears, who do not participate in that divine life, is an idea that is not every verse cover to cover, but it is present explicitly or implicitly cover to cover. And that is what is so interesting about it, because it's not a topic that people enjoy. Consequently, it is a topic that is handled poorly by a lot of my peers in the position of pastor, teacher, leader in the church, because primarily it's an odd topic. You can just inherit beliefs without having to do research on your own, and why would you after all? Because it's weird. So I appreciate you joining me in this endeavor, if you are. And what we're going to do today is look at one of the first mentions in the Gospels of a warning to those who could potentially be in the category of unredeemed, unrepentant wicked. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Luke chapter 3, verse 17. This is John the Baptist speaking. This is his warning to those that he's baptizing and preaching to. His winnowing fork is in his hand. Who's the his? Well, now he's talking about Jesus. His winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. This is clearly a reference to the redeemed and unredeemed, which we will see later as Jesus himself gives an agricultural metaphor along these basic lines. Now, we've seen unquenchable fire. It happens about 5 times in the Old Testament. Each time it is a reference to fire that is unstoppable. There's no semantic reason to assume it does burn forever or doesn't. I've given this analogy a few times. It's like an unstoppable tank. An unstoppable tank in warfare is not a tank that's always in drive. It's a tank that probably has a parking brake, but you can't stop it. So, for example, if it's on the attack, there's nothing you can do. That's semantically what unstoppable means. Unquenchable is essentially the fire version of unstoppable. And you see that with God's threats in Jeremiah, that he will burn the gates of Jerusalem, or the palaces, or the forests. Anyway, but our focus today is not on the unquenchable fire part, because that's been adequately mentioned previously, but the burn part. Now, this word burn, let me see if I have a good slide for you, is the same Greek word. I don't know if that's confusing, so I'll back up again. The word that John the Baptist used for burn is also found in Exodus when it's translated from Hebrew to Greek. So here's just Exodus chapter 3, verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him, that's Moses, in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning. Hebrew ba'ar, I cut off. Sorry, look at that. That vocalization got slaughtered. And Kayatai is the Greek that they translated from the Hebrew word burn. So the bush was burning. In other words, it was on fire, yet it was not consumed. The Hebrew therefore consumed achal is common for people eating stuff. So like you could eat achal. And the Greek word they used is katakayata. So kayatai versus katakayata, there's a difference there. One, the one on the bottom, kayatai, means it was on fire. It was burned. So there was flame. Bar. There's a presence of flame. If you saw it, you would say, wow, that is a thing that is on fire. But the thing that the bush was not was that it was not consumed. It was not achal. It was not eaten up. And it was not katakayata, destroyed by fire. And that's precisely what you would... Okay, so the narrative is based on this whole concept of a differentiation between these words. The narrative won't make sense if they're exactly the same semantically. The narrative is that there's this bush that's on fire, but it's not being consumed, and that's the miracle of it. Okay, so the thing that it was that it was on fire. The thing that it was not is that it was not burned up. So let's go here, back to Luke 3:17. The word for burn is the word katakαίω, from Katakayata and achal, eaten up, consumed, destroyed by fire. So the very thing that the bush was not is the thing that John the Baptist says will happen to the chaff. So going back to Exodus, the bush was on fire, but it was not eaten up. It was not consumed. It was not destroyed. But John the Baptist says the thing that bush was not is exactly what will happen to the chaff. And this is the foundation of his warning to his audience. Jesus' winnowing fork is in his hand. He will clear the threshing floor, gather the wheat into this barn, but the chaff he will katakαίω. He will consume or destroy by fire, corresponding to the Hebrew achal. Okay, now I'm going to follow a few other verses where this katakαίω is used in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament. In other words, to follow what John the Baptist is saying in his threat, we're just going to see where this particular Greek word is used throughout the Septuagint and the New Testament. So Greek, Hebrew, and Greek, Old and New Testaments. So in Exodus 29:14, we see the same word, but the flesh of the bull, this is like a ceremony for priests, like an ordination, sanctifying process. But the flesh of the bull and its skin and its dung you shall burn with fire outside the camp. It is a sin offering. That's the word consume, or destroy by fire. And just to make the side argument that, because I know that the Septuagint Greek is a little bit different than the New Testament Greek. Now, I know that personally from reading Septuagint Greek. For me, it's harder to read. I'm more used to Koine New Testament Greek. And so you might say, well, by the time the New Testament's around, the distinction between kaio and katakαίω may be null or void. And that's possible, but the reason why I paired Hebrews 13 with Exodus 29 is because they're sort of basically a reference to the same phenomenon, and it's the same Greek word. The bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Same word, katakαίω. And so there may be some argument to be made here that the author of Hebrews, which by the way, Hebrews is actually difficult Greek, like Luke, more difficult than average, way harder than John. So this is burned up in the sense of consumed, destroyed by fire. So used the same verb to describe the same phenomenon. So it's likely that the distinction between having flame and being destroyed, with two different Greek words talking about burning processes, that distinction may still be valid. Now I'm going to Exodus 32. He took the calf that they had made, and burned it with fire, and ground it to powder, and scattered it on the water, and made the people of Israel drink. Now, burning metal, it's not an organic material, but the process that we just see here, and as made evident by the fact that it was ground to powder and people drank it, is that this calf was totally destroyed. So the destroy by fire makes sense, even though metal is not an organic material. Okay, so where do we go in here? Now, so we're going to go back. This is actually John the Baptist's threat is in Matthew and Luke 3. So we have an Old Testament context for what this word, particular version of the word burn, means. We already know from the Old Testament that unquenchable means unstoppable from all 5 times it's been used in the Old Testament. I'm pretty sure it's 5. You see it in Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah. References to God killing his enemies, burning up forests, or palaces, or the gates of Jerusalem. But the focus today is on this Katakayata. Now, we've seen the Old Testament context for that word, but now we're going to see how it's been used other places in the New Testament. We saw the Hebrews one, but that was sort of discussing the relevancy of that distinction even in the New Testament era. Let's see other places. So Matthew 13, starting in verse 38. This is the parable of the sower, and Jesus is explaining what he meant. So the field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So everything's pretty eschatologically nailed down here and clear. Jesus is making his parable understandable. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. So the weeds are gathered and katakαίω, which means consumed or destroyed. So the thing that the bush was, it was flaming, but it was not katakαίω. But Jesus is saying that the weeds will be katakαίω. They will be burned. I mean, I did not conjugate that verb, but I'm just trying to make the point that John the Baptist's use of katakαίω is the same, it appears, as Jesus' use of the same, and their use of it for eschatological purposes also seems to be in parallel, which totally makes sense, especially, so if you were a literary critic, not even a Christian, you just see Matthew's using the same word in 2 different characters, but he's the same author. Now, you could also, on another layer, say, well, as a Christian, I believe the Holy Spirit inspired the entire literary work of Matthew and Luke and everything else together, so there's single divine author stuff. But even if you weren't a Christian or didn't believe that, then you could still say as a literary critic, well, it makes sense. Matthew is putting these words in John the Baptist's mouth, and Jesus he uses the word burned up, consumed or destroyed by fire in the same way. Okay, so we're going to go on. The Son of Man, this is the rest of his explanation of the parable. I just thought it would be helpful. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. Right? In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. In another video, we'll talk about gnashing of teeth, which also has Old Testament context. You may have already seen that context if you saw my video on the Psalms, but gnashing of teeth is not a reference to pain. In the Old Testament, it's a reference to disgusted anger, like a wolf baring its teeth, like kind of a thing. Off the top of my head, I don't remember which psalm that is, but you can Google it. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let them hear. Okay, so moving on. So the reference to the weeds corresponds to what is going to happen with people thrown into the fiery furnace. Okay, now we see the same word burned up in Acts chapter 19. So there were a lot of new believers. They came, they confessed and divulged their practices, and a number of those who had practiced magic arts brought their books together and burned them up in the sight of all. And they counted the value of them and found it came to 50,000 pieces of silver. So, I don't know if you've ever seen a book being burned. It's not a perfect analogy because it's not a person, but the verb is being used in the same way. Well, chaff and weeds aren't people either, but the metaphor was still sensible enough. Okay, so we have another use of this word burned from katakaiya. Here we have another, let's just start at the beginning here, verse 13. Each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. Now there's a contrast there. If anyone's work is burned up, Katakayata, that's the same thing that the bush was not. He will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. Okay, there's a reference to a person and stuff and fire. Now this person, who is presumably redeemed, but in a place where they deserve some kind of judgment and testing. So the word burned up is katakaiyo. It's a reference to their work, which will be destroyed. Okay. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. Now we're in 2 Peter 3. Then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. Okay, again, the heavenly bodies will be destroyed, making way for new heavens, new earth. Okay, now we see 3 verses in Revelation with the same verb, katakaiyo. In Revelation 8, the first angel blew his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mixed with blood, and these were thrown upon the earth, and a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Okay, I only bolded one of them. That's okay. Revelation 17:16. And the 10 horns that you saw, this is a reference to what's going to happen to the Babylon. They and the beast will hate the prostitute. She's a stand-in for Babylon. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. You see shortly after this an explanation of what it all means, that Babylon will be fallen and will never rise again. Revelation 18, for verse 8, for this reason, her plagues, we're still talking about Babylon here, will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. Same word. Okay, so back to the threat of John the Baptist, which is really the focus of the video. I just wanted to give you some linguistic context to help you understand what John the Baptist means, and Jesus when he tells the parable of the sower and explains it. Jesus' winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will clear the threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn. Those are his people. But the chaff he will burn up with unquenchable fire. I forgot a period at the end of that sentence. What a shame. But it's not a shame that you listened to this whole video. I'm proud of you. Very good work out there. I will see you next time with more study of what the Gospels say, and the rest of the New Testament eventually, about the final end of the wicked. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.